I still have nightmares about the first time I saw one. A crab the size of a small car, its legs spanning 12 feet across, moving through the darkness like some prehistoric nightmare brought to life. My name is Marcus Webb, and I am a deep-sea biologist who has spent the last 15 years studying one of the ocean's most bizarre phenomena. The deeper you go, the bigger things get. What I've discovered will change the way you think about the creatures living miles beneath your feet. If you're watching this from your city right now, I want you to look around at the normal-sized crabs you might see at a seafood market or scuttling along a beach. Now imagine those same creatures magnified 10 times their size, wandering the ocean floor in complete darkness under pressure that could crush a car. Sound impossible? Subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to show you is real, documented, and absolutely terrifying in the most fascinating way possible. The phenomenon is called deep-sea gigantism, and it's one of the most counterintuitive mysteries in marine biology. Here on the surface, we're used to thinking that harsh conditions make things smaller, more compact, more efficient. But in the deep ocean, the exact opposite happens. The harsher the environment gets, the more massive the creatures become, and nobody fully understands why. My journey into understanding this started 20 years ago when I was a graduate student on my first deep-sea expedition. We were studying the ocean floor off the coast of Japan, deploying remotely operated vehicles about 3,000 feet down. I was monitoring the video feeds when something massive crawled into frame. At first, I thought there was something wrong with the camera, some kind of distortion making a normal crab look enormous. But as it moved closer, I realized the scale was accurate. This thing was genuinely huge. It was a Japanese spider crab, and its leg span measured nearly 12 feet from tip to tip. I'd seen pictures in textbooks, read the measurements in scientific papers, but seeing one alive and moving was something entirely different. It moved with an eerie grace, each leg articulating with mechanical precision, its body hovering over the seafloor like some kind of alien spacecraft. And this wasn't even the deepest we could go. This was just the beginning. Over the years, I've documented dozens of species that follow this same pattern. Isopods that grow to nearly 3 feet long, looking like prehistoric trilobites pulled from ancient stone. Amphipods the size of dinner plates, when their shallow water cousins are barely visible to the naked eye. Squid that reach lengths of over 40 feet, their tentacles equipped with hooks the size of my hand. The deeper you descend into the ocean, the more the normal rules of biology seem to break down. The question that's haunted me for 2 decades is simple. Why? What is it about the deep ocean that makes creatures grow to such massive proportions? The answer, as it turns out, is incredibly complex and involves a perfect storm of environmental factors that all work together to favor larger body sizes. Let me break it down for you, because understanding this phenomenon means understanding some of the most extreme conditions on our planet. First, there's temperature. The deep ocean is cold, not just chilly, but consistently near freezing, hovering around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, regardless of what's happening on the surface. This cold temperature has a profound effect on the biology of deep-sea creatures, particularly crustaceans like crabs and isopods. Cold water slows down their metabolism, which means they grow more slowly, but they also live much longer. A shallow water crab might live 5 or 6 years. A deep-sea crab can live 30, 40, even 50 years in some cases. This extended lifespan gives them more time to grow, and unlike mammals, crustaceans never really stop growing. They keep molting and adding size throughout their entire lives. So a crab that lives 10 times longer has 10 times more opportunities to molt and increase its body mass. But it's not just about time. The cold also affects their cellular biology in ways we're still trying to understand. Studies have shown that cold temperatures lead to larger cell sizes in crustaceans, which contributes to overall larger body size. But temperature alone doesn't explain everything. If it did, we'd see the same gigantism in Arctic and Antarctic shallow waters, where the temperature is just as cold. We do see some size increase in polar regions, but nothing compared to what happens in the deep sea. So there has to be something else going on, something unique to the abyss. The second factor is pressure. At 3,000 feet, the pressure is nearly 100 times what it is at the surface. At 6,000 feet, it's 200 times. At the deepest points of the ocean, over 35,000 feet down, the pressure exceeds 15,000 pounds per square inch. That's enough to instantly crush almost anything from the surface world. But deep-sea creatures have evolved to not just survive this pressure, but potentially use it to their advantage. Here's where it gets interesting. Pressure affects how gases dissolve in liquids. The deeper you go, the more oxygen can be dissolved in the water, assuming the temperature is cold enough. And in the deep ocean, this means that despite being miles away from the surface where oxygen is produced, the deep sea actually has relatively high concentrations of dissolved oxygen. More oxygen means larger organisms can support their metabolic needs more efficiently. A giant isopod can extract enough oxygen from the water to power its massive body, because there's simply more oxygen available per unit of water. Research has shown a direct correlation between dissolved oxygen levels and maximum organism size in deep-sea amphipods. The areas with the highest oxygen concentrations support the largest individuals. It's like the deep ocean provides a hidden resource that surface creatures don't have access to. But extracting that oxygen efficiently requires certain adaptations, and one of those adaptations is size. Larger bodies mean larger gills or respiratory surfaces, which means more capacity to extract dissolved oxygen from the water. The third factor is food scarcity, which sounds counterintuitive. How does having less food make animals bigger? Shouldn't they be smaller and more efficient? In most ecosystems, yes, but the deep sea operates by different rules. Down there, food doesn't grow. There are no plants, no photosynthesis, nothing producing energy from sunlight. Everything that deep-sea creatures eat has to drift down from the surface in the form of marine snow. Dead organisms, whale falls, anything that sinks through thousands of feet of water column. This means food arrives sporadically and unpredictably. A deep-sea crab might go weeks or months without encountering a significant food source. But when food does arrive, it needs to take maximum advantage of it. This is where size becomes an asset. Larger animals can store more energy reserves in their bodies. They can gorge themselves when food is available, literally distending their bodies to accommodate as much nutrition as possible, then survive on those reserves for extended periods. Giant isopods are perfect examples of this strategy. In laboratory conditions, they've been observed to survive up to 5 years without eating. 5 years. They accomplish this through a combination of extremely slow metabolism and massive energy storage capacity, both of which are facilitated by their large body size. According to Kleiber's law, metabolic efficiency increases with size. A giant isopod uses proportionally less energy per pound of body weight than a small one, which means its reserves last longer. But there's another advantage to being large in a food-scarce environment. Larger animals can travel farther and search wider areas for food. A 12-foot spider crab can cover vastly more territory than a 6-inch crab, increasing its chances of encountering the scattered resources of the abyss. Those long legs aren't just for show. They readaptation to an environment where food is spread thin and you need to cover ground to survive. The fourth factor, and this is where it gets really interesting, is reduced predation pressure. The deep sea has predators, absolutely, but it has far fewer predators than shallow waters, and the ones that exist tend to be specialists rather than generalists. In shallow water, a small crab has to worry about fish, birds, octopuses, larger crabs, and dozens of other threats. Evolution favors staying small, reproducing quickly, and hoping some of your offspring survive. In the deep sea, that pressure is greatly reduced. Studies of deep-sea communities have found that predation rates are nearly an order of magnitude lower than in shallow waters. This means there's less evolutionary pressure to stay small and reproduce rapidly. Instead, the strategy that works is growing large, living long, and producing fewer but larger offspring that have better chances of survival. It's a complete reversal of the shallow water strategy, and it's enabled by the relative safety of the abyss. Think about it from the crab's perspective. If you're less likely to be eaten, you can afford to invest energy in growth rather than reproduction. You can take your time developing, reaching larger sizes before you start breeding. And when you do breed, you can produce larger eggs with more stored nutrients, giving your offspring a better start in the harsh deep-sea environment. Size begets size across generations. I've spent countless hours watching giant crabs on video feeds from remotely operated vehicles. And one thing that always strikes me is how slowly and deliberately they move. They're not skittering around nervously like shallow water crabs, constantly on alert for predators. They move with confidence, with the assurance of apex scavengers that have little to fear. That confidence is only possible because they've grown too large for most predators to bother with. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Not all deep-sea creatures become giants. The phenomenon is selective, affecting certain groups more than others. Crustaceans show it strongly. Cephalopods like squid and octopuses show it. Some species of fish show it, but others don't. Small organisms, what we call meiofauna, actually get smaller with depth, not larger. Understanding why some groups become giants while others do on is one of the cutting-edge questions in deep-sea biology. The leading theory has to do with how different organisms are built. Crustaceans have exoskeletons that they molt and replace throughout their lives, which allows for continuous growth. Cephalopods have no bones and can reorganize their body structure relatively easily as they grow. But organisms with rigid internal structures or other developmental constraints can't scale up as easily. There are physical and physiological limits to how large any given body plan can become. There's also the question of depth zones. Gigantism doesn't increase linearly with depth. There's actually a zone between about 600 and 3,000 feet where many organisms are smaller than their shallow water relatives. This oxygen minimum zone has lower dissolved oxygen levels because it is too deep for surface mixing, but not deep enough for the pressure to significantly increase oxygen solubility. Only when you get below this zone, into the true abyss, does gigantism really kick in. I've deployed equipment at various depths to track this transition, and it's remarkable how clear the pattern is. At 2,000 feet, the crabs are roughly normal-sized. At 4,000 feet, they're noticeably larger. At 6,000 feet and beyond, they're absolute monsters. It's like crossing a threshold where all the factors we've discussed suddenly align and size explodes. One of my most memorable encounters was with a giant isopod at nearly 8,000 feet depth off the coast of California. The ROV was exploring a whale fall, and this creature emerged from inside the ribcage like something out of a horror movie. It was over 2 feet long, with segments of armor plating that looked like they'd been designed by a military engineer. Its compound eyes were the size of golf balls, adapted to detect the faintest traces of bioluminescence in the absolute darkness. What struck me most was how alien it looked. This wasn't just a bigger version of a normal isopod. The proportions were different. The armor was thicker, the legs were more robust. It had adapted not just in size but in structure to deal with the unique challenges of the abyss. This was evolution, sculpting a creature specifically for an environment so extreme that most life on Earth could unsurvive there for even seconds. The giant isopod paused at the opening of the whale ribcage, its antennae waving slowly through the water, sampling chemical signals. Then it turned and looked directly at the camera. I know it wasn't really looking at me, that it was probably just detecting the heat or electrical field from the ROV, but in that moment, it felt like genuine eye contact. Like this ancient creature was acknowledging my presence in its world. It was one of the most profound experiences of my career. But studying these giants isn't just about satisfying scientific curiosity. It has real implications for understanding evolution, adaptation, and the limits of life on Earth. If organisms can adapt to thrive in the deep sea, one of the most hostile environments on our planet, what does that tell us about the potential for life elsewhere in the universe? Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, is covered in ice with an ocean beneath. That ocean is cold, dark, and under enormous pressure. Sound familiar? The giants of the deep sea are proof that life doesn't need sunlight or warm temperatures or any of the conditions we traditionally associate with habitability. Life just needs liquid water, some source of energy, and time to adapt. The fact that crabs and isopods have grown to monstrous sizes in the abyss tells us that evolution is far more creative and capable than we often give it credit for. It finds solutions we'd never imagined to problems we didn't know could be solved. There's also a conservation angle that keeps me up at night. Deep-sea fishing operations have discovered that some of these giant crabs are delicious. Golden king crabs, deep-sea red crabs, various species that live at depths of 1,000 feet or more, are now being commercially harvested. But here's the problem. These creatures grow slowly and reproduce slowly. A crab that takes 30 years to reach market size Q&T, sustain the kind of fishing pressure that shallow water species can handle. I've seen the data from fisheries off Alaska and in the South Atlantic. Crab populations that took centuries to establish can be decimated in just a few years of intensive fishing. And because these species are so poorly understood, we don't have good management models for them. We're essentially treating them like shallow water crabs, applying the same fishing quotas and regulations, but they can't handle it. We're potentially driving species to extinction before we've even finished studying them. What makes it worse is that we're just beginning to understand how important these giant crustaceans are to deep-sea ecosystems. They're not just scavengers, they're ecosystem engineers. Giant crabs redistribute nutrients across the seafloor, break down large carcasses into smaller pieces that other organisms can consume, and serve as food sources themselves for the few deep-sea predators that exist. Remove them, and the entire ecosystem structure could collapse. I've dedicated the last 5 years to documenting these species before they disappear. I've created databases of their distribution patterns, their population structures, their reproductive strategies. I've worked with fisheries managers to try to implement more sustainable practices. But it's an uphill battle against economic interests that see the deep sea as an untapped resource rather than a fragile ecosystem that took millions of years to develop. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to the situation. The deep sea isn't isolated from what happens at the surface. Ocean temperatures are rising, and while the deep ocean changes more slowly than surface waters, it is changing. Dissolved oxygen levels are declining in some areas as warming water holds less gas and as ocean circulation patterns shift. If the conditions that favor gigantism are disrupted, what happens to these creatures? Research from past warming events in Earth's history suggests that deep-sea gigantism decreases when ocean temperatures rise and oxygen levels fall. The giants of the abyss might be adapted to a very specific set of environmental conditions that we're in the process of altering. In a warmer, lower oxygen ocean, these creatures might not be able to survive at their current sizes. They might shrink, or they might go extinct entirely, unable to adapt quickly enough to keep pace with human-caused changes. I think about the Japanese spider crab I saw on that first expedition 20 years ago. I wonder if it's still alive somewhere in the depths off Japan, moving through the darkness with that eerie mechanical grace. I wonder if its offspring will have the same opportunity to grow to massive sizes, or if the ocean they inherit will be too warm, too oxygen poor, too altered to support giants anymore. It's a sobering thought, but there's also hope. The more we learn about these creatures, the better equipped we are to protect them. International efforts are underway to establish deep-sea protected areas, marine reserves where fishing is prohibited and ecosystems can recover. Scientists are developing better monitoring technologies that can track deep-sea populations without disturbing them. There is growing public awareness that the deep ocean isn't an infinite resource but a fragile frontier that needs our care. Every time I descend into the abyss, whether physically in a submersible or virtually through ROV cameras, I'm reminded of how little we know about our own planet. We've explored more of the surface of Mars than we have of the deep ocean. There are mountain ranges beneath the waves, taller than the Himalayas, that have never been seen by human eyes. There are ecosystems down there that operate on principles we're just beginning to understand. And there are giants, magnificent creatures that have solved the puzzle of surviving where nothing should be able to live. The phenomenon of deep-sea gigantism is more than just a curiosity. It's a window into how evolution works, how life adapts to extreme conditions, and how ecosystems function in the absence of sunlight. Every giant isopod, every massive spider crab, every colossal squid is a living experiment in biological engineering, a testament to the power of natural selection to craft solutions to impossible problems. I believe these creatures have something to teach us about resilience, about adaptation, about finding ways to thrive in environments that seem designed to kill you. They've been doing it for millions of years, growing larger and more magnificent with each generation, turning the crushing pressure and frigid darkness of the abyss into advantages rather than obstacles. If they can do that, perhaps there's hope for us to adapt to our own changing world. The next time you see a crab scuttling along a beach or sitting on ice at a market, I want you to imagine its deep-sea cousin. Imagine that same basic body plan scaled up 10 times, equipped with armor plating that can withstand pressures that would crush steel, moving through eternal night in search of food that might not arrive for months. Imagine a creature so perfectly adapted to hell that it's become heaven, at least for crabs. That's the magic of deep-sea gigantism. It takes our assumptions about how life should work and turns them upside down. It shows us that the rules we think are universal are actually just local conditions, that life is far more flexible and creative than we imagine, and that the deepest, darkest, most hostile place on Earth is home to some of the most magnificent creatures that have ever lived. I'm still studying them, still deploying ROVs into the abyss, still analyzing footage of giants moving through the darkness, still trying to understand all the factors that make them possible. Every expedition reveals something new, some detail we missed, or pattern we didn't recognize. The deep ocean keeps its secrets well, but slowly, patiently, we're learning to read them. And maybe that's the final lesson the giants teach us. Patience. They take decades to grow. They live for half a century or more. They move slowly, deliberately, without waste or hurry. In our fast-paced surface world, we've forgotten the value of patience. But down there, in the crushing pressure and eternal darkness, patience isn't just a virtue. It's a survival strategy. It's the difference between life and extinction. So the next time someone asks you why crabs get 10 times bigger the deeper you go, you can tell them, it's the cold that slows their metabolism and extends their lives. It's the pressure that increases dissolved oxygen and powers larger bodies. It's the food scarcity that favors size and efficiency. It's the reduced predation that allows them to live long enough to grow. And it's the combination of all these factors, working together in the unique environment of the deep sea, that creates the giants of the abyss. They're still down there right now, as you read this, moving through the darkness, feeding on whatever the surface world sends down, growing millimeter by millimeter with each molt. Building lives in a place we can barely survive visiting, let alone living in, proving that wherever liquid water exists, wherever there's energy to exploit and time to adapt, life will find a way. And sometimes, gloriously, impossibly, that life will become giant.